Martin, you've written a piece for tomorrow's Mail.
I have.
I've read through it. Lots of, I mean, it really is. It's a very dense piece, like a Dundee cake, and there's so much stuff going on in it. One of the things that sort of bounced out of it, I mean, tangentially to me, is Manchester United. Am I right in saying that in the last half a century or so, they've only won the title under Alex Ferguson? Is there something going on at Manchester United other than being one of the world's biggest three clubs and not winning titles?
Well, that was just one brief aside. That when people talk about, Ollie is one of these people that knows the history of the club, and I was just making the point. It's the modern history of the club actually, because before. It was the Premier League. Manchester United's last title was 1967. So this idea, and it is true, yeah. In the modern era, there's one guy that has won the title.
But they've only won the title under three managers in total.
3 managers anyway, because Matt Busby is
and Ernest Mangnall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 2 for Mangnall, 5 for Busby, and 13 for Ferguson.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's why the Wilson's on the phone tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but it's true,
Yeah.
The piece that I've written tomorrow is
give us the thrust of it, Martin.
Well, the thrust of it is pretty much that it's become impossible to make the case for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. That's the initial thrust of it, and the other part of it is that Conte is such an outstanding candidate, and the reaction. He's not the right fit. He's not this. He's a pragmatist. It defies logic to argue that Conte couldn't potentially improve. There's no guarantees in football, but it defies logic to argue that he couldn't potentially improve this team. And some of the things that are said about Conte, they don't stack up to me. He's a pragmatist. He's a pragmatic manager. The Chelsea's team that won the league outscored 11 of the 13 Manchester United teams that won the league under Sir Alex Ferguson. 11 of the 13. And one of the only 2 of the Manchester United teams that outscored Chelsea in 2016 to 17 outscored them by 1 goal. One of those 2 teams. So, he wasn't Pep Guardiola rewrote the record books, most of it was Conte's records that he was rewriting, basically. The 30 wins and the 12, did the double over 12 separate teams and things like that. It was an outstanding season, Conte.
Martin, this is interesting to me because, with our background musical, I remember as a reader, before I was editor, I remember that when the New Musical Express, then the Bible, these things, gave its first ever full-page review to an album. It was television's Marquee Moon.
Yes.
So they were right. They were absolutely right.
Yeah.
But you normally write 3 or 4 pieces, a longer one, and then 3 little side pieces in this column on Tuesday. I noticed you've given...
The record's 16 pieces in one.
Right,
well,
I noticed you've given the entire piece, all 2,000 words, to this story about Manchester United. Why is that, Martin?
Well, why? It started one way. It started with a piece about Solskjaer. It then became a piece about Conte. And in the end, you're just looking at it and thinking this is a really significant situation, because this is a watershed moment for Manchester United. What they decide to do with this season and where they decide to go and what their next move is from here. And you just thought, well, this is big enough to merit it. You could write about David Beckham, you could write about Newcastle, you could write about all these other subjects that are all interesting, and we've got 3 hours and we'll get through to them.
Yeah, we will.
But I've got one hit, and it's Monday, and they've just been beaten 5-0 by Liverpool. It's their biggest defeat by Liverpool as Manchester United, because the only time they've lost by more, they were Newton Heath. That was 7-1 in 1895.
Wow.
And you think, well, this is significant, because it's not something that's just come out of the blue. Everyone's been saying this has been coming. I don't think anyone expected it to be quite as dramatic as this, but everyone's been saying this has been coming.
Jonathan, because of your knowledge of continental football, that it's almost impossible to throw a stone in either Portugal or Germany these days without hitting a really good young football coach on the head. Those are the 2 countries that seem to me to be leading the new ideas. And so they could go that route. The Conte is another possibility. Just go and get someone who will be in some form or other successful. the thing about Ferguson is that, despite the fact he'd won a European trophy with Aberdeen, beating Real Madrid in that famous final, he was the transformative gamble. Is there a transformative gamble that Manchester United should take now, or would they be better off, as Martin suggests, going and getting one of the big beasts who are sitting there, a Zidane or a Conte, saying, well, I'm out of work and you're a super club, let's do this?
Well, I think you've got to look at who's realistically available. So, of those young Germans you mentioned, I don't think any of them are immediately there. Maybe you could tempt Ralf Rangnick, who's not a young German, but he is somebody who could put in place a proper structure,
a system. Yeah.
I'm not convinced by Zidane as a coach. I know he won 3 Champions Leagues in a row with Real Madrid, but he had great players. He's very good at managing their egos. I can see why Ronaldo.
United have got some pretty good players.
Would want him. Yeah, but they don't have a midfield like Modric, Kroos, and Casemiro, which I think gave them control. And
which they still have, by the way, and won the Clasico with. But more about that later.
So I'd have my doubts about Zidane. So it seems to me there's 2 outstanding candidates you can get. There's Conte, who would come in, would absolutely have an effect on the squad. His personality would transform a place. My doubt there is, can Ronaldo play in a Conte side? Does he press hard enough? Well, no, he doesn't. So immediately you've got a friction point there. I'm not even sure Bruno Fernandes fits in a Conte side. Conte's sides at Chelsea, at Juve, at Inter didn't have that number 10 type player. Could Fernandes play slightly deeper? Possibly, but that's a question. Then for me, the other outstanding candidate is Erik ten Hag from Ajax, who again will be somebody who would put a structure in place. An incredible record at Ajax of working with young players. So if you're looking for people to work with, Greenwood and Rashford, he would, and I think he'd be amenable to move from Ajax. I mean, Ajax to Manchester United is clearly a step up in the modern game. So they would be the 2 for me.
I mean, all I would say with Conte, I completely take Jonathan's point there. All I would say with Conte is that Hazard did extremely well in that season with Conte in 2016 and 17. One of his great seasons with Chelsea, as far as I recall.
But I mean, he was 27, 28 at the time, whereas Ronaldo's 36.
Oh no, I'm not talking about Ronaldo. I mean that. If anything, that's the one thing I suppose that Manchester United will worry about. That Conte would come in and go, well, he's not in the team.
Yeah.
Or, he's a substitute. He's an impact substitute. That's what he is. But
and this,
you've got to start. Look, I just think you've got to start trusting these guys. I've never understood the. I can Chelsea and everything like that. But the guy that knows most about football at Manchester City is Pep Guardiola. What anyone wants to say about their recruitment. Their recruitment was very, very shaky until Pep Guardiola came in, and then suddenly it took off again. And so you think, well, ask Pep who he thinks they should get. I would back Jurgen Klopp against anybody at Liverpool. I would back Alex Ferguson against anybody at Manchester United. And if you get a guy like Conte in, I can't see the point of getting Conte in and then not backing him, and then not, people say, oh, he wants control, he wants this. Okay, then give him control. Say, right. Build your team, and if it's got Ronaldo in it, it's got Ronaldo in it, and if it hasn't got Ronaldo in it, that's up to you. That's what we've got you in for. We've got you in to transform.
And of course, the flip side of Ronaldo is he has worked well with Pogba before.
Yeah.
So you gain one if you lose, even if you lose the other.
Absolutely. And the thing is that when you look at this, what I would say, and this is the other point that one of the other points I was making in the column today, is that when people talk about, they've had hitman managers and it hasn't worked, Mourinho and Van Gaal or whatever. One, those are the only 2 guys that won a trophy since Ferguson left, are Mourinho and Van Gaal. So it worked in a limited sort of way. But number 2, that didn't stop Roman Abramovich going for big managers. He got a guy in that won a World Cup, sacked him in the February. He got the best young coach in Europe supposedly in Villas-Boas. That didn't work out. He got Sarri in that Guardiola was saying his teams were playing the best football in Europe. That didn't work out. He didn't sit there and go, oh, well, that's it then, stuff it. No. We'll go and get the guy, we'll go and get a guy who's doing a really good job at Grimsby. He didn't.
And let me just say
keep going.
If Ten Hag is the right man, and what a week he's had, by the way, they've virtually wrapped up the title with that 5-0 victory over PSV at the weekend and murdered Dortmund. That's Dortmund, mind, during the week. They need to get their skates on because we know that Newcastle are talking to Mark Overmars, and that could only mean one thing, really, that they like the Ajax setup.